Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 288, Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo took place this past Saturday, and there was a lot of notable fights on the card. There was a controversial decision in the main event, and there was a lot to learn at UFC 288. And this video is going to be my top 3 takeaways from UFC 288. And honestly, I could have made the list a mile long. I could have done my top 10 takeaways from UFC 288. But I'm going to start off with some honorable mentions that I'm going to briefly touch on, and then I'm going to go from 3 to 1 in order of importance. Some are obvious, some are not as obvious, and honestly, ranking them in that list of 3 to 1 was very hard. They basically could be interchangeable. But before I even get into my list, I did an entire UFC 288 post-fight. I will link that down in the description if you want to hear all my thoughts regarding UFC 288. And also, comment down below before you even hear my takeaways. What were some of your biggest takeaways from UFC 288? I would love to know before you even hear my list. Starting off with the first honorable mention, and that is that you cannot rely on a power advantage and a chin advantage in a fight and have career longevity. Case in point, Drew Dober versus Matt Frevola. How long has Drew Dober relied on his chin and his power to win fights? He got caught against Matt Frevola at UFC 288. And got finished. And that's not the only example. That's not the only example. You also have Jessica Andrade versus Yan Xiaonan. Jessica Andrade, for far too long, has relied on her chin and her power to win fights. She's just following Yan Xiaonan, not even cutting her off at all, and she paid for it. She got finished in the first round as well. And even another example from UFC 288, you had Khaos Williams versus Rolando Bedoya. And I know Khaos Williams won this fight, and it was a controversial split decision. And I even agreed with the decision. I thought it could have went either way, honestly. But Khaos Williams was just rushing forward, relying on his chin and relying on his power. It's not going to take you far in the UFC. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some guys who have been able to get close, with just a power and chin. But you have to have other skills. You can't just rely on pressing forward, eating shots to land shots. It's not something that is going to take you far in the UFC. And I just thought, I've said this for a long time on my channel, but I just thought there were so many examples. Drew Dober getting KO'd, Jessica Andrade getting KO'd, and even though Khaos Williams technically won, the writing's on the wall. I mean, against any elite competition, he's going to end up getting KO'd. It's not going to last. You can only take those many shots and those hard shots on your chin for so long before someone eventually takes your chin from you and changes your entire career. So that's an honorable mention. Another honorable mention is Kron Gracie needs to be cut from the organization. One of the most embarrassing performances I have ever seen. I mean, that performance against Charles Jourdain, the way he's pulling guard, the way he's dragging ass on the canvas like a dog dragging his ass on the carpet was embarrassing. And I really think that Kron Gracie purely got in the UFC off his last name. He sat out for 3 years. I don't know doing what. He hasn't been training his striking, because the striking is atrocious. He makes Juliana Pena look like an elite level kickboxer, and he just needs to be cut from the organization. And honestly, this wasn't the only embarrassment on the card, to be quite honest. And this is kind of another honorable mention. The UFC embarrassed himself at UFC 288 with the post-fight antics following Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo. I'm going to do an entire video on that, so I'm not going to get into it in this video. But as soon as that's done, I will link that down below. But there's a couple different instances, specifically on the main card, where the UFC embarrassed themselves at UFC 288, and I'll make that whole other video. But Kron Gracie in particular, I mean, who enjoyed watching that? Who enjoyed watching that? I don't know who enjoyed watching that. I wish Charles Jourdain would have finished him, but watching Kron Gracie, pull guard and then not even go for submission attempts, wasn't even able to go for submission attempts, and then he's dragging his ass around the canvas. It was just something that put me off on the entire card. Moving on to the actual list, starting off with number 3, and this is kind of a two-parter, but Aljamain Sterling deserves your respect. I know people are delegitimizing this win over Henry Cejudo. I thought it could have went either way. I thought you could give Henry Cejudo 3-2. I thought Henry Cejudo took rounds 3 and round 5. I thought Sterling took rounds 1 and round 4, and I thought round 2 was a 50-50 round. I'm going to go back and rewatch it and revisit my opinion on that. I thought it could have went either way. That doesn't change the fact Henry Cejudo is a very good fighter, and Aljamain Sterling went out there and was super competitive with him and beat him. He beat him. The only 3 people's opinions that matter, Aljamain Sterling won on their scorecards. And I know you can go back and question the entire resume, and I'm not happy about it either. I've been a person who's been vocal about Aljamain Sterling's resume and how he's kind of been fluking his way through the bantamweight division. The TJ Dillashaw win. He dominated TJ Dillashaw, but TJ Dillashaw came in with an injured shoulder. The Piotr Jan split decision win at UFC 273. I thought Piotr Jan won that fight. And then, of course, the one that everyone knows about, the illegal knee by Aljamain Sterling, or by Piotr Jan against Aljamain Sterling, that won Aljamain Sterling the title via DQ. I get it. The resume isn't a great look. But the fact, even if you want to say he lost all those fights, he lost the Piotr Jan fight if it wasn't for the DQ. He lost the second Piotr Jan fight. You know, it was a close fight, but he lost it anyway, in your opinion, or my opinion, you know, whose ever opinion. And then the TJ Dillashaw fight, well, it didn't really matter because TJ was injured. And then I think he lost the Henry Cejudo fight. I'm just saying, from the broad UFC fan deniers of Aljamain Sterling, even if you believe all that, and I don't think it's crazy to think all that, you have to give him credit. The performances have spoken for themselves. Even if it's ugly, even if it's not aesthetically pleasing, even if you don't want to watch his particular style, it's effective and he's able to get the job done time and time again. You know, what more do you want him to do? What you want to all of a sudden, you want to have him fighting like Conor McGregor? Even Aljamain Sterling, I mean, in that first fight against Piotr Jan, the pressure early was unbelievable. Aljamain Sterling's not my favorite fighter, and his style, particularly in the last few fights, especially the Henry Cejudo fight, and just the way he's kind of on all fours and whipping his head back and forth on the ground, which is an embarrassment, honestly, in my opinion. And, you know, even that, you still have to give him credit for performing at a high level, and we have to start giving him more respect for being a champion. I understand it's not an ideal scenario. And that's why this is kind of a two-part, because the other takeaway that kind of goes along with this number 2 one is Sean O'Malley is our last hope. If you want to see Aljamain Sterling lose, Sean O'Malley is our last hope. That is going to be the next fight. I think if Aljamain Sterling beats Sean O'Malley, I think he's going to get close to retirement. I think maybe he tries to go up to 45. He's probably going to lose there, but if you want to see him lose at bantamweight, Sean O'Malley is going to have to be the guy to do it. And I know a lot of people are adamant, and myself included, early prediction, I'm going Aljamain Sterling. As much as Sean O'Malley has a disadvantage on the ground with Aljamain Sterling, that is the same is true regarding the striking disadvantage in O'Malley's favor. So Sean O'Malley is our last hope. If you want to see Aljamain Sterling lose that title at bantamweight, I truly believe Sean O'Malley's probably going to be the last hope, because I think Aljamain Sterling's going to beat Sean O'Malley and try to move up or potentially retire and give Marab an opportunity. So if Aljamain Sterling goes out there and let's say he ragdolls Sean O'Malley, beats him and finishes him, I think a lot of people are going to start saying, well, Aljamain Sterling has now earned the respect. You know, look at his resume in its totality. He's the GOAT of the bantamweight division. So if you really dislike Aljamain Sterling, you really dislike some of the antics of being on all fours and, you know, putting on the Oscar performance when he got illegally kneed, Sean O'Malley is our last hope. I'll be rooting for Sean O'Malley myself against Aljamain Sterling. I don't hate Aljamain Sterling as much as some of the other fans. I just hate the way he won the belt. Honestly, that's still one of those things that's bothering me. And I know it's Piotr Jan's fault, but it just rubs me the wrong way. And then some of these performances, I understand you can put doubts on them and this and that, but we have to. And when I say we, I mean myself included, because I've been doing it as well. We have to give Aljamain Sterling his respect. Moving on to the number 2 takeaway from UFC 288, and that is that Henry Cejudo ruined his career with his retirement back in 2020. Henry Cejudo is 36 years old. He had an opportunity to come in here. He got a title shot against Aljamain Sterling, and he lost. And it was a close fight. The decision arguably could have went his way. If Derek clearly scores round 5 the right way, Henry Cejudo gets the decision there. But he didn't, and he lost. And Henry Cejudo looked good in this fight, but he looked a little bit off early, especially. Had he not been out for 3 years, this fight's a whole nother story. This fight is a whole nother story. Aljamain Sterling wins this fight, but Henry Cejudo, he sat out from May 9th of 2020 all the way till May 6th of 2023, almost exactly 3 years. There's a timing issue there. There's ring rust, which is basically the timing and just being in there. And I think had Henry Cejudo stayed active, I think he probably would have won this fight against Aljamain Sterling. And you can't deny the fact that now he's gotten older. He's probably gotten a little bit slower. He's probably regressed among his skill set. And, you know, I think it was a massive mistake. He lost 3 years of his prime. He could have fought 6 times, collect 6 paychecks in his prime, continue to win, continue to defend that bantamweight title. And I just think it was a massive mistake. He retired as a negotiating tactic. The fans didn't care. The UFC didn't care. We all moved on. We all forgot about him. And then 3 years later, he's like, oh, this didn't work out the way I thought it would. Let me come back. You know, people want to crap on Francis Ngannou for what he's doing right now. If anybody made a mistake, Henry Cejudo, I believe, made a massive mistake because he wasted 3 years of his prime. He wasted 3 years of his prime being inactive, not getting those paychecks he could have gotten, not staying champion. And now he comes back and the UFC doesn't do tune-up fights. He jumps right in there with Aljamain Sterling. He loses via decision. He's 36, going on 37. Is he really going to work his way back to another title shot? I think it's highly doubtful. I think it's very highly doubtful that he ever works his way back to a title shot, especially considering the shark tank that is the bantamweight division. And, you know, I can add another takeaway to this number 2 spot is that Henry Cejudo was delusional in his thought process. I'm going to take on Alexander Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski would have bullied him so badly. He would have looked worse than the Korean Zombie against Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski would have literally killed Henry Cejudo. It would have been a brutal destruction, a finish by Alexander Volkanovski. First or second round TKO, in my opinion. So that's another takeaway. But I just think Henry Cejudo, at an advanced age, the older you get, it does not work at the lower weight classes. You can't fight into your 40s at bantamweight. It just doesn't work that way. So I think Henry Cejudo hopefully has a lot of money saved up. He's making money off of YouTube. You know, hopefully he's going to be all right. But he's never going to be champion. And he even said, I may just retire now. So he sat out for 3 years. He comes back, 3 years off, fights the champion, loses. I don't believe he's going to get another title shot anytime soon. I find it highly doubtful that he finds himself in a position to fight for a title, especially when you got guys like Merab. You got a guy like Sean O'Malley been waiting in the wings for a title shot. You got Umar Nurmagomedov making their way up the ranks and countless other guys in the bantamweight division just waiting for an opportunity to fight for a title. I think Henry Cejudo made a massive career blunder by retiring in 2020, and I don't believe he came back and got a substantial raise that he wanted. He retired as a negotiating tactic, and I don't believe he got what he wanted. And it's unfortunate because we could have watched him for the last 3 years compete at bantamweight. He says he's never going back down to flyweight. And also, I feel bad for Henry because he's one of those guys that's too small for bantamweight but kind of too big for flyweight. And that's why he doesn't want to go back down to flyweight. It was too hard for him cutting all that weight. He had issues with it in the past. But yeah, I think it was a massive career disservice by Henry Cejudo retiring in 2020. Moving on to the number 1 takeaway from UFC 288. And that is that Bilal Muhammad deserves a title shot over Colby Covington. It should be Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad next. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but he should be getting the title shot next. And I know people are going to delegitimize Bilal Muhammad's win, but look at his resume as a whole. He's on a 9-fight win streak. And I know some people try to say, oh, well, there's that no contest sandwiched in there. That doesn't derail a win streak, in my opinion. And you look at his last few fights. He beat Gilbert Burns at UFC 288. Top 5 win. He beat Sean Brady, a top 10 win. He beat Vicente Luque, a top 10 win. He beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, a top 10 win. Now, I think Vicente Luque slipped out of the top 10 since then. I'm not 100% sure. But I believe Wonderboy Thompson, Sean Brady, and I know Gilbert Burns are still currently in the top 10 of the division. And you look at that in stark contrast against Colby Covington's resume. He's 2-2 in his last 4 fights. He got finished against Kamaru Usman in a title shot. He's had 2 title shots. And his most recent win was a win over Jorge Masvidal in March of last year. He's been in witness protection hiding for over a year. And now he's going to walk back into a title shot when you have a much more deserving contender in Bilal Muhammad. I think it's egregious. I think it's ridiculous. And I think people really need to give Bilal Muhammad his respect. He went out there, a lot of people, I got laughed at for picking Bilal Muhammad. Since I've had this channel, I've picked against Bilal Muhammad each time. I picked Sean Brady over him. I picked Vicente Luque over him. I picked Stephen Wonderboy Thompson over him. I said, no, he's not getting me again. I'm picking Bilal Muhammad to defeat Gilbert Burns. Bilal Muhammad took this fight on 2 weeks' notice, coming off of Ramadan, cutting weight, and potentially injured. He confirmed, I know there was a lot of speculation about an injury going into this fight. He confirmed at the post-fight that he was injured going in this fight. And he went out there and 50-45 Gilbert Burns. And people are constantly riding Gilbert Burns, and I don't disagree with you. Gilbert Burns is a savage. He's the elite of the elite at welterweight. He's a great fighter. Bilal Muhammad went out there and outstruck him for 5 rounds, landing nasty body kicks, slamming head kicks into that guard of Gilbert Burns, defending takedowns. Gilbert Burns kind of got one takedown in the first round. That's where he injured his shoulder. People are going to try to discredit this win because Gilbert Burns injured his shoulder in the first round. It's irrelevant. Bilal Muhammad was winning up until that point. And there's one key factor that people forget when they say, oh, well, Gilbert was injured. Well, where did Gilbert injure himself? Where was that? Because if I'm not mistaken, he injured himself in the fight. So it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Bilal Muhammad won this fight. He dominated this fight, and he looked good doing it. I'm not saying I favor Bilal Muhammad to go out there and starch Leon Edwards, but a 9-fight win streak, four of his last wins, or he's on a 4-fight streak against guys who were in the top 10. We have to give him a title shot. And I know it looks like the UFC is going to do Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Bilal will get the winner. And I think that's fair to Bilal Muhammad. At least he's still getting a title shot next. But honestly, I think the next fight should be Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad, which would be a rematch. The first fight ended in a no contest after Bilal Muhammad got eye poked. And I know for a lot of fans, oh, well, that's not a big fight. Colby Covington isn't a big fight either. People act like he's some kind of massive draw. He had horrible ratings when he was on free TV, and I know the time slot was a little bit weird. Horrible ratings. The UFC, in particular Dana White, go off of these analytics, social media analytics like likes on Instagram and views on Instagram translate to pay-per-view buys. There is no evidence to directly support that in the case of Colby Covington. There's no evidence. His only fight that we have any pay-per-view numbers was, I believe, the first Kamaru Usman fight. It was a title fight. It did good on numbers. It didn't do anything spectacular. You're acting like it did over 1 million buys. You had Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal, arguably one of the biggest stars in the sport at the time, behind Conor McGregor and maybe behind Nate Diaz. And guess what? We never got those pay-per-view numbers. You know why? Because it didn't do that well. If it did great, if it did over 1 million buys, the UFC and Dana White would have been putting it out there. Oh, it did crazy numbers. There is no evidence to support that Colby Covington is some massive draw, and that's what supports him getting a title shot. It should be Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad, but luckily, at least the UFC is doing the right thing and giving Bilal Muhammad the next title shot. They're telling him to sit out. He can fight the winner of Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. But what's unfortunate about that is you're giving a title shot to a guy who doesn't deserve it, and it's probably not happening till October. So Bilal Muhammad's now probably going to be shelved till spring of next year. Bare minimum, February of next year. I don't even think that's going to happen because I don't think Leon Edwards is going to be particularly super active as a champion, which, is one thing that Kamaru Usman had going for him. But Bilal deserves respect. We shouldn't be delegitimizing his win. He went out there against a game Gilbert Burns and 50-45'd him. And I know there was one scorecard that had 49-46. But either way, it was a dominant win by Bilal Muhammad. We should be giving him the respect he deserves, and he does deserve the next title fight, in my opinion. But yeah, those are my top 3 takeaways. Obviously, I had a bunch of honorable mentions. Let me know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.